Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Workflows with eSignatures, Small Changes with Big Impact. I'm Teresa Resick, the Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are George Dunn of Create Inc. and Mary Ellen Power of eSign Live by Vasco. eSign Live is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining the webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience. So feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows on your screen. And across the bottom of your screen is the list of all of the widgets that are available to you. We do have a feature for you called the group chat, and you do need to open that yourself by clicking on the widget icon that's at the bottom, in that list across the bottom. And with this group chat feature, you'll be able to chat with each other, and you'll also be able to chat with Allison and me here at AIIM. So just be aware that everyone's going to be able to see and interact with everything that you're posting there. But I do encourage you to join the conversation and help each other out during the webinar. And do also we can take your questions for the speakers throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and we will hold those questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance as well. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time, so just look to the resources list, and that's to the right side of the slide area. And there's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. At the end of the webinar, a brief survey is going to open on your browser, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you take a few moments to offer your feedback and also to suggest other topics for us to cover. You can also access the survey in that list of widgets on the bottom of your screen. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. Right now, I just want to take a moment to introduce our speakers that we have with us today. George Dunn is the founder and president of Create Independent Consultants, and he is a worldwide recognized consultant, speaker, instructor, and author on business process improvement, workflow, computer system replacement, and advanced paperless technologies. He holds many process improvement certifications and accreditations, and he formerly was a CPA. Create Inc. is an independent consultancy with more than 20 years of service to clients, all of which are end users. And then we also have with us Mary Ellen Power, and she is eSign Live's Vice President of Marketing and has over 25 years of experience in marketing for technology companies. And she's led the successful rebranding of eSign Live's eSignature platform. With more than 15 years in the eSignature market, Mary Ellen is a subject matter expert focusing on business value justification, customer adoption, and success. So right now I'm going to turn things over to George Dunn to begin his part of the presentation today. George?
Well, thanks, Teresa. Appreciate the introduction. As mentioned, we've had the opportunity to be independent consultants in this area for about the past 22 years, and one thing I really enjoy is the opportunity to share what we're learning out in the field, doing studies and working with clients as they're implementing the technology. So really kind of that rubber meets the road type of knowledge. And so in today's webinar, I'd like to discuss a couple of things. One is some ideas on what are the best ways to use this type of automation, electronic content management, workflow, digital signatures, electronic records management, to improve operations, the importance of a well-thought-out digital workflow within your ECM system, tips and best practices to map out the processes you seek to automate in a way to help eliminate bottlenecks and create organizational improvement, and also how can we look at and calculate a return on investment through implementing these technologies, including digital and electronic signatures. The next slide's here, just a little bit of additional detail regarding the kind of work we do. I'm just going to go ahead and jump past those. You can go back and look at those later. So in doing this type of work, what do we find out there? Across the board, what happens, what we see is that 30% of these systems that are implemented really fail to meet operational needs. They're not functioning correctly. The users are not really happy about them. 35% of the systems provide moderate benefits, so they're working, but we're finding a lack of significant business benefit, and 35% of them do provide significant benefits. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the software typically. What it has to do with how was the system planned for. And so I want to talk about these attributes, these kind of takeaways you can take with you to really help in the design of these systems and make them successful. So what are the key factors that hold organizations back from being successful? The first, as we find, is there's no, for many organizations, no overall enterprise-wide plan on how they're going to deploy ECM, workflow, digital signature technologies. They typically get a project, it comes up, they've got a user group that's interested, and they deploy it. But there's not an overall budget for the next 5 to 8 years. There's not a roadmap. There's not a plan. And all of us know that work with organizations that unless we've got that in place, it's hard to reset and go on to the next project. So organizations lose momentum. Another reason for lack of success for some organizations is inconsistent module deployment. We might find they've implemented electronic content management, workflow has been implemented inconsistently, and electronic records management may not have been implemented at all. One of the most important technology we're seeing lacking is that of digital signatures. And that's why I'm really excited about today's presentation, because that technology really is the icing on the cake. It really is what makes these technologies work better together. And we're going to talk about that in the case study. Another reason for implementation challenges is processes are not improved before deployment. Typically the vendor will show up and say, well, what would you like me to do? And that's a difficult place to put the vendor, because there could be 10 or 20 or 30 people that work within that process, or 1,000 people, and the process has not been normalized, it's not been improved. So in essence, you're layering technology on top of the way a process works today. So in the case study I'll go through, I'm going to talk about some ideas on how we can avoid that from happening. Another challenge is that records management programs are not updated before the electronic records management deployment. So those rules are not put in the system. Record series, close dates. Incomplete application design or RFP is another reason. They may do a very simple feature function benefit statement, get it out there to the vendors, but there's not a really solid, strong user narrative of what we're trying to accomplish for that application. And another reason is an incorrect vendor or integrator may have been selected because the other work has not been done ahead of time, so we may not have selected a vendor that could meet the needs of all of the enterprise or meet the need of a fully designed application. So these are some of the reasons. So how do we then create a plan? And we're not going to have time to go through all of these, but what I'd like to focus on in today's session is some key takeaways on how do we develop an enterprise-wide plan for these technologies. How can we implement modules consistently, and how can we improve processes before deployment? So when we talk about an enterprise-wide plan, what I like to do is kind of take a step back and say, let's not just push the technology into the organization. Let's ask some questions of executives. And let's say, what are the strategic goals for the organization? Where do we want to be 5 years or 10 years from now? Are we in a situation where budgets are going to be reducing? Are we in a situation where we need to better meet the needs of the customer? And in understanding where the organization needs to go, then we can figure out how can these technologies help enable those goals. The next is talk about within the organization, what are the department goals and the process goals? What are they trying to accomplish? How do processes interact with each other? What processes could be repeatable that could be automated by the technology? Also, what type of audit or regulatory requirements are out there that this technology may be able to assist? Are there lawsuits that are happening on a regular basis, and are there core reasons as to our ability to respond to those suits because we can't find the documents or there's incorrect version control? So these are some enterprise-wide planning considerations that I think are important. Other questions we ask is, along the line of goals, is what do we want to accomplish? Is it cost savings? Is it a return on investment we're after? Or is it knowledge protection within the organization? Are people planning on retiring 3 or 4 years from now? And is that knowledge going to walk out the door? So can we use these technologies to protect that knowledge? What about customer service? If the organization produces something in 10 days and it costs $5, but the customer's saying today, I want it for 5 days for $5. How do we get to that place? And I'm going to show you a little bit about that in the case study. Transparency is another consideration. Many organizations today want to have documents completely transparent to many of their customers, especially in governments. It's a whole new way of thinking about the design of a system like this. There could be new ways of working, could be risk reduction, new services. At the department or group level, I think it's really important, once we've selected or identified our goals for the system, is to say, what are the building blocks? What are the software modules we need? By asking these questions, both in the enterprise-wide study and then in the application design, we can really get a feeling for what's the depth of these knowledge, these modules, and the capabilities. So we're not just having the vendor present what they can do, we're setting a specification. Just like if you were to build a building, you wouldn't build it without a blueprint or an architect. Unfortunately, in the computer industry, many times we just go right into the build stage without a design. So we want to understand what are the needs within capture, recognition, ECM for digital electronic signatures, what are the needs to really create a paperless process, workflow integration, and retention disposition. At the process level, we want to understand the impact of this technology. Will it improve efficiency? Will it improve quality? What's quality? Doing it right the first time. How do we get quality? We do it by integrating workflow, digital signatures, and ECM at our portal level. So we're analyzing information at the very beginning. We're eliminating transactions from entering the process that are not complete. So we're trying to eliminate rework. Look at service improvements. You know, what can we do in that area? Regulation, litigation, as I mentioned earlier. So what we want to do is go through our process inventory that we developed the enterprise-wide level and then rank those processes on how can they be improved within these different categories. And that will help us in terms of our return on investment calculation. Some of our considerations when we get to this level is we have some opportunities here. On the ECM area, we have an opportunity to rethink how are we working today. And it could be just as simple as indexing and searching. You know, you have 50 different people or 100 different people. They might index documents differently on their shared network drives within their email systems. We have the opportunity to normalize those and to say what other indexes do we need to help us better service the customer or service operations. Consolidation of records, form redesign. If the form is 10 pages, maybe it should be 3. If it's 1, maybe it should be 5. Replacement of physical signatures with digital signature technology. So we've got this opportunity to talk about this in the design stage, which gives us the opportunity to really create a strong design, not just to automate, but to innovate an organization. And also to talk about document lifecycle and workflow sources, uses, and outputs, because there's different needs for those documents. At the sources level, how do we capture documents? At the uses level, how do we search and retrieve and workflow? Output level, how do we maintain a properly designed electronic records management module? Some considerations in looking at workflow is who is going to define the new process and how do we define the new process? Also the ability of the software to handle volumes, task complexity, routing complexity, queues, and interface requirements. And of course, management of workflows. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tips and best practices to map out the processes you seek to automate and to eliminate bottlenecks. We kind of talk through these, and I put on my process improvement hat, and in doing this work, we apply Lean and Six Sigma and BPM techniques to really get at the root of what's going on. And why do we do this? Well, we hear a lot of statements about the benefits of this technology, but how do we accomplish those benefits? It has to happen by doing a detailed workflow study before implementation. This will allow us to get at the 5 to even 45% in savings or an improvement, whatever it might be, whether it's customer service or its efficiency or its quality. To do that, we've got to establish a baseline. How does the process work today? I would have to say that outside of manufacturing, 80 to 90% of the organizations out there in other industries don't even have a really up-to-date or well-documented baseline. How can you improve a process if you don't know specifically how it works today? Part of that will be, once we develop a baseline, is to do a redesign of the process. And in doing that, I like to look at procedural changes and technology changes. And you'll see that in the case study, how I've kind of gone through and given you some examples. by doing that, we then can really develop a more detailed return on investment, showing the executives, here's our baseline, here's our redesign, here's the change, and here's what the return on investment is. Now, I find that's accepted really well within organizations versus just putting a spreadsheet together. Another important fact or an outcome is by doing our workflow assessment, we can really identify what are our design requirements ahead of time. So when we engage with a vendor, we can say, here's our workflow, here's our application design. Now tell us what you can do for us and how you can further innovate this process. If we don't have this cookbook designed, how does the vendor know? How do you know what your costs are for the system? So these are just fundamental basics I find that are really valuable. So let's talk a little bit about digital workflows. And I'm going to do that through presenting a case study to you. And I picked contracting. It's one of my favorite areas to look at. So don't try to read this slide. It's kind of small, and I'm going to break this down for you. As Teresa mentioned, I'm a former CPA, so I can't help but count up all these steps and do an analysis. But what we see here is a number of different types of contracts, different thresholds, different amounts, different types. Where you see the bubbles is different levels of review. Some smaller contracts can go straight through and be approved. Others are going to go to budget committee. Others are going to go to executive committee. Others are going to go to the executive for sign off. And I know you find this within your organization. There can be 20 to 50 different types of contracting types with a lot of twists and turns. So let's talk about how to develop a return on investment by going through and breaking down this. So what I've done is I took that high level and we created a very detailed step level baseline. I'm not going to share that with you here because it would take too much time. But let me give you the recap of what we found. So we counted up all the steps and then put them into categories. So you can see here on the left side is the different types of contracts, over 100K, under 100K, professional services, capital projects, and to the right we see the different types of work. So we have main work categories, sort, copy, print, transport, approve and sign, and data enter. So here if you go to the bottom there are 1,202 steps. So what did we find when we broke this baseline down? We found that 18% of the steps were data entering, 9% were approving and signing, 23% were transporting, 25% were main work, and 25% were sort, printing, and copy. So what I did then is I took these steps and then we added in what's the volume per area, and then the average minute per process step. And you notice at the low end for like small works under 100K, it's 4 minutes. At the higher end for large public works, it's 15 minutes per step. So this is an average across all the categories. We then times it by all these together to get the total number of minutes and divided it by 60 to get the number of hours, and then based upon 2,080 hours per year came up with a full-time equivalent. I like this example because this shows just 47 FTEs in this process. So it shows that in a case study like this, we don't have to have thousands of people. We can effectively show how this technology can improve a small organization as well. They then times it by the average loaded cost per FTE. We took $80,000, which includes wages and benefits. So it came out with an overall labor cost of about $3.7 million per year. What we did then is, based upon the redesign, is that what are the steps today? And then the first level redesign, as I mentioned earlier, is what can procedural changes do to that redesign to help improve the process? And what I find that's really important is that technology can improve automation and efficiency, but to really get at quality changes, we have to go and take a look at that process, identify the root cause of issues, perhaps load more steps at the front part of the process, eliminate rework, understand our value chain between vendors and customers. And so the first step is procedurally, what can we do to improve the process structurally? By doing that, main work we were able to reduce by 10%, reduce sort, print, copy by 30%, transport was by 28%. We were able to reduce the number of signatures by 19%, data entry by 30%. So a total average, when we average those all out, was a 20% improvement, which I think is significant. And a neat thing about doing this is that we can use this and do this work while we're going through vendor selection so we can improve the process. Then by adding in the technology, ECM, digital signatures workflow, ERM, adding that into the stat, we then get an improved efficiency. Overall reduction with procedural changes and adding in the technology, ECM, digital signatures workflow. Main work was able to reduce by 26%. Sort, copy, and print, it was all gone at 100%. Transport was reduced in total by 64%. Approve and sign stayed at the 19%. Still have the same number of signatures based upon our procedural changes. Data entry then was also further reduced. So if we look at this, then the actual time to complete each one of these contracts, on the average, we can see the reduction. So we can look at small works went from 6 hours to 3 hours. Professional services went from 26 hours to 14. General capital projects from 75 to 41 hours. Of course, each process has its own twists and turns, but we're seeing significant reduction in the amount of time, as is indicated in this slide. So if we then cost this out and say what is the labor cost benefit, we see some significant opportunities here. With the current contracting cost for 1 year being about $3.7 million, if we times it by 5, I like to use a 5-year model. It's $18.9 million in labor. So our procedural improvements are significant at $3.8 million. If we add in our technology improvements, it's $10 million. And so we've effectively reduced our current labor costs over a 5-year cycle from $18 million to $8 million, which is quite significant. Now, of course, this type of improvement is going to be core to one area of your business, and then you'll be able to make decisions. How can we reposition these employees to other areas to provide additional customer service? How can we match this up with normal attrition within the organization? But this is a really exciting use case study type of example because of the tremendous benefit. Now what I've left to the right-hand side is really the cost of the technology, because that's going to depend upon the vendors you talk to, the type of technology you're looking at. So I'll leave that up to you to reach out to the vendors, and then you can kind of match these together. So that's it. Just a quick final note is this is the total time to complete. One was the actual time, so we see that time waiting has been reduced significantly, and I'll let you go ahead and take a look at that. Last slide here is just really, this is based upon our experience, and we think if you want to apply this model going forward, you should get assistance from internal or external consultants so they can look specifically at what your process considerations are. So having said that, I'd like to now turn it over to Mary Ellen to talk about eSign Live by Vasco. Mary Ellen?
Oh, thank you, George. That was just a great setup, and I think you really articulated it well. There's so many organizations that have invested in their digital technology stacks, and at the end of the day, to really get that return on investment, as you illustrated, you have to get completely electronic. And we kind of look at eSignatures as just a piece of that full infrastructure, but where it comes in, it sort of unleashes the investment that probably your organization has been making for significant years to really achieve that digitization. So that was just great to see that entire use case just laid out. So thank you, George. That was great. So what I wanted to do is just ask our audience, before I step into this, I'd love to get your perspective on, what is the primary reason that you're evaluating digital technologies like workflow and electronic signatures. So if I can ask you to just take a few minutes, I'm just going to bring you through the main areas that we're seeing organizations look and get your opinion on, what's a primary area for you. So the first one is, are you increasing, are you really looking at digital technologies to increase employee productivity? So are you looking at enabling, bringing on board new employees? Maybe it's annual reviews, maybe it's privacy agreements. So things that help improve the productivity of the employee. Or as George talked about, excuse me, is it a cost-driven initiative? Is it around really eliminating anything related to paper, faxing, scanning, on-site or off-site storage? Or is it around those improvements in the process? Is it like bringing a loan from, let's say, 16 steps down to 4, or maybe if you're in insurance, a new business an application from 15 days or 55 days probably down to 15 minutes? If it's not, is it around convenience and the modern approach that you want to bring to your customers or your citizens? And if not, is it the larger digital transformation initiative that you've just been brought into because that's what the organization is doing? So I'm going to push to the poll and see what our audience's experience has been. Okay, so it looks like, from what I can see, employee productivity is low. That's great to see. Reducing costs is not the primary reason. It's always part of the business case, like George illustrated. But really improving digitization, that's boding well with what we're seeing in the industry as well. And part of a larger digitization information initiative is still on the small side. Okay, well, thank you for that. That really helps me get a better sense of who the audience is and where you're at today. So what I wanted to do was just start off with the big question that we get all the time is, where are organizations focusing on adding electronic signatures? And what I love about this slide is it really helps articulate that electronic signatures, there's opportunity throughout the entire organization. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. What this really shows is that you can start in the far left-hand side, which is really around B2E. You could end up in B2B, which is what George talked about in contracting, or you could come all the way up to the B2C side, which is really customer-facing or citizen-facing. And what we see here today is the lower left-hand side is what we would call easier to get started with transactions. If it is employee related, although you might not be considering that as your first, or it may be in fact, if it's within your internal departments, it's easy to get up and running with an employee type process. Usually it's lower volume, the use case and the probably workflow is a little bit simpler. Once you start moving into the B2B area, in the area of procurement or contracting, it depends on where you're focused. If you're looking at the internal process, getting the sign-off, before you actually bring that contract out to bid, you probably have 5, maybe 6 stakeholders that have to sign off on that. We've seen organizations in the regulated market have up to 14 signatures on those internal process. What ends up happening is that that's not automated. That could elongate you getting that contract out the door and getting that project started. So this is a big area. It's big in commercial. It's big in government. And then on the other side of that is the whole non-disclosure agreement, the contract and agreement between you and the contractor, and maybe even the statement of work. So this is an area we see in every single industry, really focusing on trying to improve that, because ultimately it means you're getting projects started sooner. Now on the far right-hand corner, in the customer-facing or citizen-facing transactions, this is where the volume gets voluminous. The transaction might get a bit more sophisticated. Maybe you're looking at identity, authentication, integration into core systems. But the opportunity in this far right-hand corner is that mostly it affects your business, whether you're government or a commercial organization. It's probably what you're responsible for. Generating loan applications, generating insurance applications, or maybe permitting and licensing in government. And and this is where really today where organizations are trying to improve that experience, making it easier for consumers and citizens to sign. So the next slide, I'm not going to spend much time on it. It's a bit of a takeaway slide. But what we get asked is, well, it's great that you've told me there's 3 categories I could start. What I want to know is what's the application in my industry that you're seeing electronic signatures being adopted on a regular basis. So in here I've highlighted in blue, based on the industry, where we see continuous adoption of electronic signatures in a more frequented basis. But every one of these mentions in a business process today is using eSignatures in a live production. So you've got lots of choice. It really depends, like George said, what is motivating you to go completely digital? Where do you want to get started? You might want to start with a low-hanging fruit and get up and running, but you might run parallel projects as well that will give you a bigger, wider impact, like an account opening, or maybe at the end of the day, a manufacturing process. So that's a good takeaway slide. Now what I wanted to do was really spend the next few minutes level setting terminology and really legal basics. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is what we get asked, not as often, but it was a question that pretty much came up every time someone started to look at adding an electronic signature to a workflow. Is this legal? And today it is legal. It's been legal for almost 17 years in the United States. And so it's no longer a barrier, but what's important is to understand some of the nuances behind the legality in North America, and most recently some significant changes that have been made in Europe. We do have some multinational companies on the webcast today, so I'm going to cover both in a little bit of detail. So here in the United States, as in most countries around the world, the law accepts an electronic signature. So the U.S. law is based on something called the UN Model Law for e-commerce. But there are two really important pieces of legislation, and the first one is at the federal level. So if anybody is using electronic signatures today, you've definitely come across this. This is the eSign Act, and at the state level, the UETA Act, so the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act. Now these laws are what we call enabling laws. They give the electronic signature, records, and transactions the same legal weight as paper counterparts. So UETA was enacted in almost every state, but it really doesn't matter if UETA exists or not, because the federal eSign law takes effect. It supersedes that state. Now there are both of these laws are technology neutral, and it's really important to remember that. What these laws do is they say what an electronic signature needs to accomplish, but it doesn't say how, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But what these laws do is they act as an overlay statute. So basically, wherever the law says that you have to provide something in writing, you can fulfill or replace that requirement with an electronic version. Now there's only a handful of exceptions in the United States. One exception is a will. If you're also in financial services, there's a couple of other regulations that you just need to take into consideration. So if you're in the mortgage industry, auto finance industry, or the student lending industry, you're working with something called a negotiable instrument. And just at the very bottom of that slide, I mentioned the UCC 9-105 commercial code regulation. And so we can talk about that offline, but you definitely need to look at that, and there's a separate set of requirements specifically for transferable records. Okay, so in Europe, what's been great is about a year ago, a new regulation came into effect, and it's called eIDAS. So for a multinational company on the webcast today, or anybody from Europe, what's great about this new law is that it covers electronic identification and trust services, and that encompasses eSignatures. What's great here is that it replaces the EU directive that did exist, but it caused a lot of interpretation by countries, and it really, in the end, confused and sort of slowed down adoption. What we've got now is not just a directive, but a law that establishes what eSign does in the U.S., basically legal equivalence of an electronic signature to a wet ink signature. And what's great here now is any member country can't reject a document solely because it's in electronic format. So we're already starting to see some really positive effects in Europe, and seeing some great adoption. So what I want to talk about now is what is an electronic signature. So if you think about the definition, it's either a sound, a symbol, or a process. The second thing it has to do, it has to be attached or logically associated to the contract or record. And the third thing it has to be is executed or adopted by a person with the intent to sign. So what I want to talk about just is how this interconnects, and ultimately at the end of the day is what you need to be most concerned about. The first thing is intent. There are lots of options for capturing intent. You can do a click to sign, you could capture a handwritten image on a tablet or your phone. The law doesn't care what you do, but what you need to think about when you're designing an e-signature process is that it clearly captures the signer intent. So back to what George was mentioning, when you get into that design phase, what you want to make sure is that you are making it very clear where you're placing signature cues, and that it's clear to who's about to sign and accept what they are agreeing to. And that's at the end of the day what a judge is going to look at if there's ever a dispute. The second thing is if you've got to meet the requirement of executed or adopted by a person. What that refers to is that you have to have the ability to prove that Jane Doe is the one whose intent you just captured. So think about, at the end of the day, a PIN, a password, shared secrets like challenge and response questions. Maybe there's integration with Equifax. You might even have an issued digital certificate, which is often used in Europe, or you might even be using biometrics. That's what helps you prove that Jane Doe is the one that is the intent that you're capturing in that process. And then the last requirement is being logically associated. And the way an electronic signature application should do this is the intent needs to be logically associated to the authentication. And what ends up happening is most electronic signature applications use something called digital signature technology. And the way that can be done is you can embed that signature information into the final signed document. So to kind of pull that together for you, I just want to review this very quickly. An electronic signature is a legal concept. It's not a technology, even though it sounds like it. It's truly the equivalent of a wet ink signature. A digital signature, which often people use interchangeably with e-signature, is really the encryption technology. That's what's used as the security behind the e-signature application. It's going to provide the tamper sealing of the document, and it's also what's going to provide the protection that if something does change in the document, it'll say, don't trust this. It'll invalidate the document. The identification is something that you must have, and that's just basically verifying someone's identity. So like we said, you've got your own name, you've got an email address. Those are examples of identification. But in the electronic world, you also have to authenticate. So that's verifying those user credentials. So think PIN and password you enter before you access the system. And then the last one is user attribution. And this, again, is so important. It's proving who actually clicked when they applied the electronic signature. And think about it like who's actually holding the mouse when they're doing the click to sign. And those are the 5 sort of terminologies that when you get into this, you'll end up really asking yourself and kind of applying that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a couple of best practices. So one of the more important things is to this audience, who's folks that are really involved in enterprise management solutions, record management solutions, is around data integrity and making sure that you are implementing something that will meet the compliance requirements. So what you get as a chance when you're moving into a digital transaction is, like George said, you get to rethink that workflow. You get an opportunity to really create an improved digital footprint. And the best way I can compare this is you will actually get more insight and more detail in the electronic process than you will in the paper process. We call it the kitchen table syndrome. Think about when an application lands on your kitchen table. You open it up, you shuffle through the paper, and what do? You read it and you sign it any way that you want. You have no real insight or way to enforce how that should be reviewed. So what you end up getting with an electronic signature and tightly integrated workflow is you capture greater detail. You basically get not only how, but when that transaction took place. You get a memorialized view of that entire signing ceremony that will exist forever, whether that's 7 seconds after the transaction or 7 years later. So what you should be looking for is you want a standard audit trail, so you want to know, what you signed, but you also want to know how you sign it, and that's the visual audit trail that we're showing here. You want to make sure that your vendor gives you the ability to be able to play back that transaction and make sure that you captured exactly what that looked like during the signing transaction, whether it took place on the phone or on an iPad or on your screen. You want to know every action that was taken. So this is what we call a visual audit trail, and that'll allow you to recreate that signing event, especially if you ever have a customer dispute or you ever get pulled into a court of law. The second thing is the scalability. And I'm going to fly through this one a little faster. Today you have the choice of on-premises, public, or private cloud solution. And it's really up to your own corporate policy. What you want to make sure is that you have the choice from your vendor. You want to make sure that they provide you the ability to have either one of those, or maybe even a combination. Because at the end of the day, your organization is going to determine whether they want the control and storage behind a firewall like an on-premises, or they maybe not have the IT resources but still want the security of a private cloud or a public cloud. The last best practice is really around white labeling. And this is important more when it comes to making sure that that transaction is completely seamless. It's your brand that should be in front of your customer. The customer is doing business with you, especially when you look at those customer-facing or citizen-facing transactions. So you want to work with an organization that gives all ownership up of their brand. You want to make sure that that white labeling capability allows you to have total control of what that application looks like, from the logo to the notifications to everything about that transaction. Your client shouldn't be feeling a transition from your website to a signing solution and then back to you again. And the reason for that is because you want high adoption on anything you're rolling out. And we've realized, working with small and large organizations, that it's best if the institution's brand is front and center and not the eSignature or the workflow brand. Okay. So the last couple of slides are around an example of working within a workflow solution that you might already be using. So Nintex is one of the integrations that we have today. What's great about this is if you're working within that UI, you have the opportunity to actually kick off the transaction right from within that workflow. So Nintex sits on top of SharePoint. This particular integration works with SharePoint on-premises. What it allows you to do is start the transaction right within that UI. So it's pretty easy. On the far right-hand side is the Nintex UI. It's 3 easy steps. You can start with a template. You can reuse that template right within eSign Live. We've already placed eSign Live in that UI, and through 3 very simple transactions or actions within eSign Live, you can create any workflow. So you can create, you can set up, and then you can digitally download and store that signed document back into your own enterprise content management solution and apply any kind of retention policy that you want to do to that. So this is what you get when you're working with a more sophisticated workflow. So the last slide is really around options. When we talked about having different options, as George said, how do you want to get started? You can use an out-of-the-box solution where you literally use templates and you enable your users to leverage those templates and send those e-signed documents out. Or you can use something that's more integrated, like we just talked about with the Nintex workflow, where you really get to control the workflow and the e-signing and the design of that. And you can also, use out-of-the-box integrations with other types of solutions. So that's really what I wanted to share today. So Teresa, if we've got an opportunity, I think, to take some questions, and I know you wanted us to leave some time for that.
Sure, thank you. And actually, I'm going to advance one more slide here and mention that in the resources list to the right of your screen, there is, eSignline is offering their beginner's guide to electronic signatures. And any of the resources that are in that list, feel free to click on those. It's going to open in a new browser tab. You can check them out after the webinar, but feel free to access all of that information there. And we have been listening to Mary Ellen Power of eSign Live, and before that we were listening to George Dunn of Create Inc. And we do have a bunch of questions already coming in. Feel free to go to that the Q&A tab in the lower left side of your desktop and submit your questions in there. So let's see here. George, I want to direct this first question your way here. Very early in your presentation, you were quoting some statistics in here, and someone was asking the source of the industry stats that you were using.
Well, those are based upon our experience after doing this work for, as an independent consultant for 22 years. When we have a lot of clients that call us in where they've started to implement the technology or have had it in place for 5 years or 10 years. And so this is our experience, what we find in terms of how these systems are actually functioning.
Okay. We have a question coming in here, and Mary Ellen, this is for you. Someone's asking about seeing a demo. I know that the link that we have here of course I'm not pulling it up properly.
On the
slide? Here on this slide, there's a link here. When you download the presentation, you have a copy of this link information, but I've also put that link into the resource list for you. Can you just speak very briefly about what's involved with that demo or the information that they'll receive?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, if you are an Intex customer, you have access to that connector immediately. You just have to go to the Intex Exchange, and you can get access to that, or you can come directly to the eSign Live Apps and Partner section, and you can get access to it. We also have a really short video, about 2 minutes, that shows you exactly how to create those transactions, which will also give you a feel. And there's a whole bunch of resources there, a dedicated data sheet, and as I said, documentation that'll walk you through that. So absolutely, that's available.
Okay. And someone else has asked a question here, and I have to admit, because it's not something that I fully understand, I'm just going to read this exactly. And Mary Ellen, if you could start with this, if you can expand a bit on the UCC Art 9 regarding banking. I'm not quite sure if this is
correct. Yep, that's right. So that was the last requirement I glossed over a little bit. This is a bit of a more complicated response, but what I'll do is I'll just I'll respond simply, and we actually do have information in great detail on that. In the banking industry, if you've got a student loan, a mortgage loan, or an auto finance loan, there's a requirement for that loan document to become a transferable record. And basically what you have to do is ensure that you can create an authoritative copy of that in the electronic world. And so it requires a different set of requirements to do that and a different set of technology to do that. So today, you wouldn't just use an electronic signature solution, but you'd use something called an e-vaulting solution. We do have a sister product that would work, that is an e-vault, and that would handle that requirement. And the reason for that is that eventually, if you want to do something called securitization of your mortgage notes or maybe your auto finance loans and liquidate that, you need to be able to have that authoritative copy in an electronic format so that you can do that all the way through securitization.
We have a question in here, and I'm going to preface this question by saying I realize that with the far more frequent use of mobile devices, whether it's smartphones or tablets in the field, whether you're having your customers and constituents work on that directly, or just things like claims adjusters or contractors who are out at a job site, what are some of the challenges with signing on a mobile device?
Yeah, that's a good question. So many people today are really trying to enable the remote workforce to be able to complete that multiple business processes using remote tablets and phones. We have a great example of the city of Sacramento. What they do is they have all of the ADA ramps all over their city, and there's thousands of them. And in order to make sure that they are actually approved regularly, they wanted to make that be able to happen right there when you certified that the ramp is okay, and that's a mobile workforce. So they developed that, and that now can be completed on an iPad or a tablet. And that crosses every industry. So the issue is you want a mobile responsive design, so you want to make sure that the eSignature provider's solution is built to be responsive on any device. That's not for you to take care of. That's the responsibility of the eSignature provider. The second thing is also if they happen to have an SDK, so that if you've developed a mobile app, you just want to be able to drop in the eSignature into the place that you need that approval. So if they've got further capabilities to be able to also drop in the eSignature into the mobile app that you may have developed. The other big thing I would say is just making sure that that design is done in a way that's very intuitive. Mobile experiences are different. So just really testing out that solution, and you can easily do that on a quick demo, a trial, where you yourself can feel out that mobile experience. That it's making it simple, it's intuitive, making it responsive, and as we also outlined in the compliance side, is making sure that you get all the electronic evidence that would normally come, on a desktop. Make sure you get that also on a mobile experience as well.
Someone's asking if does the eSignature eliminate the use of initials in forms and contracts? And I'm guessing that they're referencing at intermediate stages in a document where you're asked to initial certain sections before you get to a final signature. How does that work?
Yeah, so George, I don't know if you've experienced that like with your own business case. Today we don't eliminate like electronic signatures doesn't eliminate the need for initials. What we do is we accommodate the ability to actually just have initials in replacement of the full e-signature. I don't know if you've had any experience with that.
Yeah, and part of this is, as we break down the process, is to identify what is, where is an authoritative signature necessary versus just what might be a click in the workflow pattern, that I've reviewed it, that I've accepted it, and not to over-engineer a process, and is an approval necessary or not. A lot of times we see initials that just mean that I've looked at this. We see these on blueprints, we see these on paperwork. So I think part of it is to take a step back and say, where is it a workflow, authorization, and then we can have that available in metrics. Where does it require an actual signature? And also, just to comment on the earlier point about mobile devices, I think we've got a great opportunity. I call it the ricochet effect. Is a lot of work in the field is linear. We have limited amount of information. By different pieces of information we put into a form and having fields ricochet back and forth to main databases, we can get more information in the field, whether somebody's going into a confined space or they're picking up goods and they're doing a survey for hazmat, whatever it might be. We want to look at that interaction, and that can really be powerful. And then, of course, with the digital signature technology, we've got the authorization. But just to your point, Mary Ellen, and to the earlier point.
Yeah, no, that's great, George. And I would just also add, you're right in that you don't need to always, capture the initials or an electronic signature. Sometimes we also find in contracting that there are a number of people that just need to see the document. And we've just introduced a new capability called document visibility, and it literally allows you to set up the hierarchy of the signing process, but also of the review process. In other words, if you're going through the contract review, you want some stakeholders to see what's happening and to review, but they don't necessarily have signing authority. But you want them to see and agree. So those are the type of capabilities that come into the more sophisticated contracting use cases.
Well, and I could see that within training. Training could be an excellent place for that too, showing people review training materials, the amount of time they took to review them to help, reinforce that. So,
Absolutely. Yep, signing off on that, they got that certification.
Yeah.
I want to squeeze one more question in here before the end of the webinar hour. And Mary Ellen, it's another question back to you. Someone's asking that if the customer needs an account within the electronic signature application to actually sign the document, how would that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. You would think they would, but they don't. At the end of the day, if you're providing the electronic signature solution, all the customer needs is a web browser. At the end, this is really what we call a zero client, so nothing is downloaded onto the signer's device. So today, and every e-signature provider should be able to do this. So the customer doesn't need an account. They actually it's just the sender who does, so the organization that's actually setting up the document for signing. And this can go out to multiple signers. Every one of them will just receive an email notification, and depending on the signing method that you've selected, that's how they'll apply their final approval and intent.
Okay. We are getting to the end of our webinar hour, and I just want to remind you that this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available in the next day or two at the Resources Webinars page on AIIM's website. I also invite you to check out some more in-depth training at AIIM.org, and here's a link here to our entire training program. There's a variety of different courses, course topic areas. We can do them in person, have them available online, and we can also provide customized training. So I invite you to check out, and you can also let us know if you're interested in just learning more about that. So feel free to do that. And also, George, I know you had mentioned this at the very beginning. You also offer a lot of training for your own customers and people that you interact with just in general. Just want to give you an opportunity to speak very briefly about the training that you offer directly.
You bet. Thank you. Yeah, we've launched this year worldwide training workshops. We've had people attend from everywhere: Europe, Australia, Middle East, and U.S. and Canada. And we're breaking that down into 8 hours of content: how to develop an enterprise-wide plan, how to look at your workflow patterns and improve those, how to do a return on investment calculation, how to develop an application design. And so we're really excited about that 8 hours of content spread over 4 weeks. And it's been great experience. We're on our second and third workshop cycles right now. So, but thank you, Teresa, for asking us about that. So more information is available at our website. They can find out more.
Oh, you're welcome. And certainly, George, when you download a copy of the slides, his web address was throughout the presentation, especially early on. So please feel free to reach out to George. For me, I just think it's so important just to let everybody know all the breadth and variety of training resources that are available, because it's all good stuff. Just want to remind everyone to download those resources that are listed there. And also that beginner's guide is a really good resource. I've seen it before, and it's a fantastic resource. So ask you to go ahead and take a look at that. Also, when the webinar is over with, value the feedback that you're going to provide, so appreciate if you take a few moments to complete that survey. I also want to thank the underwriter of our webinar today, eSignLive. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM wouldn't be able to provide you with these free educational programs like the webinar series. So thank you very much, eSignLive, for your sponsorship and underwriting support. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I want to leave everyone in the audience here with our speakers' closing thoughts or key takeaways. And so I'm going to start first with, let's start first with Mary Ellen Power of eSignLive. Your closing thoughts today.
Hey, thank you, Teresa. And I just really also want to iterate, what George is offering and his organization is exactly what we see so many companies just grappling up front, which is how do you build out that business case. So great to see what you did present, George. I thought that was excellent. Just playing off of that, I think keep the e-signature and workflow process really simple. Don't make it any more complicated than you have on paper, and you will get high adoption and incredible impact on your business.
Just to follow up, Mary Ellen, thank you for talking about your technology. I just think this whole thing with digital electronic signatures is so exciting. It's the last piece we've been waiting for to really create paperless processes. And I guess my key takeaway is that I think don't don't ignore the planning phase here. Do your enterprise-wide studies, do your workflow maps, do your before and after to show the return on investment. The number one thing preventing deployment of this very exciting technology is budget. And I know that once you've done a correct job planning and get those numbers in front of the executives, you'll get budgeted for this technology and be able to make it really happen for your company and for its customers.
Thank you. And that was George Dunn of Create Inc. And that is all we have time for today. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. This is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time. And have a great afternoon.